F1's first race weekend with brand new cars and engines was a massive learning curve for everyone, and it could all change very quickly following the Australia season opener. The divisive 2026 rules might be adjusted after just 2 races, with a meeting planned to discuss the biggest issues with this troubled regulation set after this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix. The first race of 2026 in Australia exposed a lot about the new cars and engines, especially the consequences of massive new battery demands, and left a lot of drivers and fans unhappy. With effectively a 4 megajoule battery powering a 350 kilowatt or 469 horsepower electric motor, providing a little under 50% of the overall power of the cars, significant harvesting and discharging is required to lap quickly. What Melbourne laid bare is the counterintuitive and underwhelming ways that's being achieved. This includes superclipping, running the MG UK in reverse while the engine is flat out, which meant some drivers even had to downshift at full throttle in qualifying, including poleman George Russell. While this hasn't quite manifested in the absolute worst case scenario predictions Red Bull and Max Verstappen made years ago of the 2026 cars downshifting on straights to charge the battery, it's deeply underwhelming that the straight line speed and engine revs reduce so much that it's being done out of necessity. F1 and the FIA accept that the energy harvesting and deployment rules may not be pitched at the right level. But despite outright disdain from some towards the rules, the rulemakers believe it makes no sense to rush through changes. That's why nothing was done before Australia, even though all of this came out in the wash in testing. The opening race just proved an extreme version of it. Discussions took place between F1, the FIA and teams in the gap between Bahrain testing and Australia, and a timeline was agreed on how to sort things out. F1 needed firm evidence of how the racing would be to know what needed changing, and as the Albert Park circuit is in the top 4 of the worst circuits of the season for energy management, it was agreed that reacting solely based on what happened in Melbourne would be wrong too. The other problematic tracks for reference are Jeddah, the Red Bull Ring and Monza. After this weekend's race in China though, F1 will collectively evaluate the learnings of the first 2 races and decide what, if any, action needs to be taken. And that action could come as early as round 3 in Japan on March 29th, with further tweaks following in subsequent races. The looming cancellation of the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian races in April because of the ongoing conflict in the Middle East will also give some breathing space to sort out a proper package before the Miami Grand Prix in May. The qualifying spectacle is the biggest weakness of the 2026 regulations. First and foremost, there's the fact that high-speed corners, such as the spectacular Turn 9 in Melbourne, are no longer taken at the limit of the available grip. That's nothing to do with the reduction in downforce of the smaller, more nimble cars. Effectively, underdriving there is rewarded as it allows you to harvest energy to deploy for a net time gain elsewhere in the lap. That's why McLaren boss Andrea Stella argues that we will have to look at if something should be done and what should be done to make sure we retain the DNA of driving Formula 1 cars trying to exploit the grip rather than having to exploit the harvesting and deployment. Being obsessively careful about battery levels in the race led to an unusual racing spectacle in which the energy regime is now king. It's now no longer enough to get ahead and stay there by the next corner to consolidate your position. Instead, you must get ahead and know the state of charge of your battery is sufficient to ensure your rival doesn't simply breeze back past. Some have likened it to high-speed chess. Charles Leclerc says it's now more about strategy than being the bravest. This made for a dramatic race in Australia. Leclerc and George Russell swapped positions multiple times in the early laps, but the Ferrari driver was effectively always ahead because of what Russell called a yo-yo effect. As Red Bull team principal Laurent Mekies points out, it won't take long for teams to get on top of this and work out the ideal combination of timing, battery level and deployment strategy to get ahead and make it stick. He reckons it will only take 3 or 4 races before this yo-yo racing is reduced. So don't expect too many more frenetic lead battles like Russell and Leclerc's, which is why leaving things as they are will likely lead to much more cautious, stagnant races. The FIA has been keen to avoid knee-jerk reactions, but says it has a few aces up our sleeve that could help if needed. One option is to increase how powerful superclipping is. The MG UK is currently limited to charging at 250 kilowatts in this form, but it could be increased to the full 350 kilowatts. Theoretically, if drivers could charge their batteries more aggressively this way, then they would do it later on the straight. There'd still be a speed drop-off of course, but it'd be less of a painful gradual ramp down starting way before the corner. This might also replace the lift and coasting that some teams are choosing to do instead, because when you do that you charge the battery using the MG UK's full 350 kilowatts anyway. That's not any better in practical terms, but psychologically for the drivers at least there'd be full throttle, not lifting, so that's at least intuitive. And for those of us watching, yes, the speed drop off would remain, but again at least it's not a full throttle lift, which is a lot more obvious. Another possibility is to decrease the power that can be deployed, most likely in the race. While this would mean a reduction in total power output, it would be able to be deployed more often. There would be less aggressive management required, as the battery would be drained less, and therefore less extreme tactics and varied strategies to recharge it. There is also some consideration to seeing if there are ways to boost the power of the internal combustion engine, like increasing fuel flow, although this didn't seem a particularly popular move in pre-season. Whether one or a combination of these solutions could be the answer will be discussed after China, but they will probably at best mitigate the problem. Given you need to take every opportunity to harvest, given how much lap time is gained by having more battery energy to deploy, the fastest corners will to a greater or lesser extent all be neutered. And that's a big reason why drivers are unhappy. Williams team boss James Vowles warned against rushing through tweaks that may not work, or worse, might exacerbate the problem. But even Mercedes boss Toto Wolff, whose team dominated the season opener so would in theory benefit most from maintaining the status quo, accepts that tweaks may be necessary. His main point is that the driving force for alterations should be based on what fans like though, not just because teams or drivers are moaning. Supposedly teams were unanimous in wanting to wait. Although we find that hard to believe given McLaren raised various issues it felt could have been addressed before Australia, so maybe all teams accepted waiting, but it wasn't everyone's preference. And there are a lot of fans clearly impatient for change, as well as very sceptical drivers who aren't likely to bite their tongues while waiting for things to get better. If you want to learn more about what's really going on with all this, make us your F1 Paddock Pass by joining the Race Members Club. Get 90% off your first month in the Members Club and come behind the scenes with us for exclusive updates, expert analysis and bonus podcasts just for you. Just check out the link below to claim your 90% discount. Whether the rules are tweaked or not, there's a lot of learning for the teams to do. They are still traversing a steep learning curve in optimising harvesting strategies, as tiny differences in deployment are leading to big lap time swings. McLaren boss Andrea Stella and his Williams counterpart James Vowles have been surprised by the difference compared to the Works Mercedes team, for example. It's also making life confusing for drivers. There are still lap-to-lap inconsistencies as the self-learning strategies adapt, while at times there's completely baffling behaviour, such as when Oscar Piastri had an unexpected extra 100 kilowatts of power delivered exiting turn 4 on his reconnaissance lap and crashed. Even something ostensibly straightforward such as preparing the battery on the formation lap proved difficult in Australia, with the Mercedes drivers Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc all being in various degrees of strife when it came to battery level. The teams will learn fast, but for these early races, this is causing plenty of disorder and variability. Another area in which teams and manufacturers have their own priorities is actually getting their cars to run reliably. Everybody was super impressed by the reliability of the new cars and engines across testing, with Aston Martin and Honda being the obvious exception. But multiple teams covering every engine manufacturer had a problem of some kind across the weekend. Williams didn't get Carlos Sainz out for qualifying, Lance Stroll's Aston Martin didn't appear at all on Saturday, and McLaren and Cadillac had issues in practice that hurt mileage. Come the Grand Prix, a pre-race problem wiped out Nico Hülkenberg's Audi, Red Bull suffered its first engine failure as a manufacturer which dropped podium contender Isaac Hadjar out early, and Valtteri Bottas' Cadillac stopped on track. With a sprint weekend coming next in China to give teams another new challenge entirely, we wouldn't be surprised if reliability continues to be an early season variable across the grid, regardless of what fiddling around the edges is done with the rules themselves.